Welcome back to the Leadership Collective podcast, your go-to platform for global expansion, insights and strategies for businesses. My name's Chris Danks and I'm the founder of the Leadership Collective, and today we're excited to continue our deep dive into global capability centres, also known as GCCs, as I'm sure many of you will know now if you've watched the previous podcast. This time we're going to focus on India's diverse city tiers and the opportunities they present for global businesses, looking at which cities you might want to consider if you're moving into the region. So we're delighted to welcome back our returning guest, Vinu Nair, who's been a tremendous source of insight in the past episodes. For those of you that missed those previous podcasts, let me reintroduce Vinu. So Vinu has an extensive career spanning industrial sales, IT, across the world of recruitment, and brings a unique perspective, having worked across 20 cities globally and gained first-hand experience with regional interconnectivity, talent ecosystems, and local leadership in India. As someone who knows India like the back of his hand, Vinu has a deep understanding of its Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 and beyond cities, each of which offers distinct advantages and challenges for GCC operations, which we're going to dive into in a minute. Vinu's expertise makes him the ideal guest to help us explore how companies can make informed decisions about where to establish their GCCs and how to maximise their impact. Good to have you back, Vinu.
Thank you, Chris, for having me. I'm ready to answer all the questions that you have for me today.
Good. Yeah, it's nice to have you again. Let's jump straight in then. To set the stage, Vinu, we've talked a lot in the past about India as a possible location and probably one of the leading locations for global capability centres. Would you mind by starting the conversation by breaking down the tiers of the different Indian cities that companies might want to consider when setting up a GCC operation?
Yeah, sure, Chris. The answer might be slightly stretched because the nomenclature of Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 was preceded by something called a metro and a non-metro city. So India had about 4 metro cities. That's one in the north, one in the east, west and south. So it's basically Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai and Kolkata, which most people are familiar with. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 comes in the context of their readiness for business, how they can enable business. For example, Tier 1 are most of the metro cities and 1 or 2 cities added, mostly from a point of view of their ability to provide talent, connectivity, infrastructure, and any support around running business operations. It could be GCCs, it could be anything. So Tier 1 is mostly capital cities, and to give you examples, Tier 1 cities are Chennai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune, Delhi. These are Tier 1 cities. Tier 2 is very close to the capital city of any of the states. India has got about 29 states, and they're very close in terms of proximity to the capital city. They do not have an abundance of talent and infrastructure, etc., but they're very promising. That's why Tier 2 cities are called what they are. And Tier 3 are the emerging ones, cities which are remote. They have a little bit of connectivity, but they have one of the positives very strongly. Either they have talent, they have stable, they have a great ecosystem, or there is some other industry already functioning there. So there could be a garment cluster, there could be an automotive component cluster, or there could be anything that they support globally. So there is industry present in some form, there is talent available. So Tier 1 is the largest one, Tier 2 is the mid-tier, and Tier 3 is the smallest of the contenders for Tier 2.
Vinu, what are the defining features of Tier 1, Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities in India, and how do they impact GCC operations?
I mean, I have stressed multiple times in our discussions that the number one thing about setting up anywhere is the talent. So talent is the number one outlook of anybody wanting to set up in a Tier 1, Tier 2 or Tier 3. Obviously, it's there in Tier 1, but how much of it is available in Tier 2 and Tier 3 decides if you want to choose one of those cities. The second one is the ecosystem around setting up a GCC. By ecosystem, I mean the whole things that come into play to help set up a GCC. It could be hospitals, it could be schools for children, it could be colleges that feed into the GCCs and employees. And it could be airports or the nearest airport. And what's the future plan of the city to grow in future? So apart from that, is the government promoting a particular territory? Because some of the governments, like in India, I always mention there are about 29 to 30 states, and government takes up initiatives to support one of the tier 2 or tier 3 cities to enable them to attract businesses. So these are factors that are to be kept in mind when you're choosing a tier 2 or a tier 3 city. Obviously, tier 1 has got everything.
Okay, very interesting. And when you're deciding on that location, how does the scale and the purpose of the operation influence the choice between the different options?
Uh, I mean, my advice to anyone who wants to set up a GCC in a tier 2 or a tier 3 city would be set it up as an expansion of what you have in a tier 1 city. Because in tier 1 city, you've got your act together, you've had your leadership in place, you had your critical team members in place, you started delivering service, and then you're looking at a tier 2 or a tier 3 city to either optimize your costs, point number one. Point number two, I mean, we are all getting into a phase of extreme weather, right? Chennai as a city is very large, but at least 3 working days a year, we are shut off because of extreme rains. So business continuity is one of the reasons why people would look at a tier 2, tier 3 city. So that's topmost. And then there are other factors which decide tier 2 cities or tier 3 cities. It depends on companies' objective if they want to do some corporate social responsibility. Going to a tier 3 city makes sense because they would be catering or they will be helping people of that area grow. The region will become the region will benefit from a lot of jobs being created. The youngsters over there have some ambition and a target company to get into. So this could be some of the reasons, but primarily it is driven by costs, and primarily it's driven by business continuity plans. And of course, the other factors that I told you just earlier about the ecosystem.
Have you got any examples of companies that have moved into like a tier 2 or a tier 3 city, and from the get go, and what their key motivation was? Was it mostly cost, or were there other factors as well?
Yeah, it's not so common, but yes, companies have started doing that. I can think about maybe 2 companies. One of them is a very interesting one. This is a uh, uh, global engineering company. They are into various verticals, one of them being aero, one of them being automotive and chemical components, etc., chemicals, etc. And they had a tier 1 GCC center for about 10 years. And they toyed with the idea of setting up something in a tier 3 city. They had a reason to do that, and then out of the blue, in 2 years, they grew from 0 to 500 in a tier 3 city. And when I was meeting the CIO in one of the meetings, he said, we may need your help in recruitment in tier 1, but not in tier 3, because they said that it's one of the most attractive things, places to work. Their company was one of the most attractive companies to work in that entire region. So they are able to attract talent, select what they want to have, and attrition is not even in single digits. So he was mighty happy with that decision going to a tier 3 city. And I know from another experience, one of my clients wanted to set it up in a tier 2 city. This is a Belgian company. They've been present in a tier 1 for about 12, 13 years. And then they said business continuity, cost rationalization, diversity in talent, because India, most of the talent is centered around languages. So diversity in talent, they wanted to set up one more city. They chose one of the tier 2 cities, set up something, and they're pretty happy with what they have done. So I can't name the companies, but both these instances, they had a GCC in tier 1, and then they either moved to tier 2 or tier 3.
Can you name which cities or regions they moved into, just out of curiosity?
One of them moved into a city called Madurai, which is in south of Tamil Nadu, and the other one too is a Tamil Nadu state, which is a city called Coimbatore. And Coimbatore is in the west of Tamil Nadu, and it borders both Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. To make it easier, very close to Chennai and Bangalore. So it's equidistant from both the places, and both these cities had a huge industrial base already.
Okay, I see. They've sort of built off that, okay, and attracted talent from it. What does the talent look like? Outside of some of the tier ones, is the quality of talent the same, or does it require more work to bring people up to speed in certain roles, or do you get access to the same level of niche talent that I know is a big reason people move into some of the tier one cities?
I mean, I can give you based on examples that I do. Let's say one of my clients is setting up a 200-member team in a tier one city. Even in a tier one city, they will have to factor about 10 or 15% of the talent from outside the tier one city, in the sense that the talent is not available locally and they have to move to another city, or they have to move from another city or base them in another city. We call it hybrid work. So when you keep that in mind, tier one cities itself is not self-sufficient in terms of talent. So tier two obviously starts from a talent deficit. But the important thing to note is that tier two talent gets attracted to that city either because they are promoted from a tier one city and go on to a nice leadership -1 role in a tier two city, making it slightly complex. You're already working with the tier one city. With the GCC, when they decide to set up in a tier two city, you are elevated in your role and then you're sent to a tier two city. So you go there. That's one option. The second one is there are people who are working in various cities in India who want to come back to their hometown, which could be the tier two city that a client intends to set up. So you're attracting talent which wants to come back to their hometown. So that's one of the bases. And the number 3 reason why people set up in a tier 3 city is they can create talent out of nothing in those cities. They can go to colleges, hire talent, train them, because the attrition is so low and the cost is so low. So over a period of time, in 2 or 3, you're filling up the bottom part of the pyramid with local talent, which is more loyal and they love the brand, they love the company, they love the earning that they have. And it's not as thankless as being in a tier 1, where it's a given that you get a job in a multinational company and you're paid X amount of money. So if you understand the lifestyle of a tier 2, tier 3 city in India and what it means to get a multinational company job, a stable job where you're trained, you have skills, and then you go on to serve global customers, you will understand the aspiration and why people get glued to that jobs.
Interesting. What percentage of organisations would you say have 2 GCCs then in India, as opposed to just having one in the main hub, for example?
Yeah, I think I put that number between 30 and 40%. Let's say there are 1,700 GCCs, so 30 to 40% have them in 2 locations. Could be tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. But these days, a lot of companies are thinking in terms of tier 2 and tier 3 cities.
Okay. And just actually one thing we should probably clarify, at least on the tier ones, where are all the main tier 1 cities for those people listening in? And we're talking about the tiering, but would you be able to share that? Maybe after this, we can share more details on tier 2 and tier 3 options, which are obviously from people that come from further afield, maybe a bit more obscure and unknown. So where would you say are the tier 1 cities now, just to clarify?
I mean, tier 1 is mentioned all the time on a daily basis, which is Delhi. We call it the National Capital Region. Delhi has a few satellite cities around it, National Capital Region. The second one is Bangalore. Who doesn't know Bangalore? There are t-shirts saying, I was Bangalore, which means he lost his job and it was set up in Bangalore. So Bangalore is one of the cities. Then there's a city called Hyderabad. Then Chennai, where I'm from. Then there's a city called Pune. Essentially, these five cities are tier one cities. And and tier two cities are, if you understand a little bit about south of India, very close to where Hyderabad is, there is a city called Vizag, Vizaq, and Vizag is a tier two city, a very prominent one. And Chennai, where I am from, there are two tier two cities, which is Coimbatore and Madurai. And there's a city which is gaining a lot of fame in north of India called Indore, which is spelled as Indore. Then around north of India, once again, there's a city called Chandigarh. Chandigarh is the capital of two Indian states, shared capital of two Indian states. That's becoming a very prominent tier two city. So these are examples. Tier 3 cities again are cities like Mysore, Mysore, Mysore. And then there is a city called Tirunelveli in the south of India, Trivandrum, Cochin. Trivandrum and Cochin could border tier 2 and tier 3, but these examples will help people relate to tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3 cities.
Thanks. Yeah, I think most people will know the certainly the tier one cities, even if they've not been to India before. But it's really just trying to understand what those tier one cities are for GCC. So that was very useful. How do companies? So we talked a little about retention. You were saying actually in some of the tier two and tier three cities, retention is not really the major problem, given that there's people have, I suppose, fewer options. It helps them find the job that maybe they're looking for. The pay might be better, of course, than what they'd otherwise experience in those locations. Are there any other sort of specific challenges about the locations? Is there a lack of talent in certain areas, or what are some of the challenges?
Of course, there is a lack of talent in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, but just like anywhere in the world, tier 1 cities were only thought of as destinations to go and work. So people thought necessarily to grow their careers, they have to be based in tier 1 and tier 2. So the pandemic taught us how we can work remote, and some of the people went back to closer to their home in tier 2, tier 3 cities. They were continuing to work or providing the normal services. And then tier 2 and tier 3 became very attractive to them. So it's closer home. I mean, you can be closer to where your parents are, you have your friends, and you have people who you grew up with. The ecosystem is very, very comfortable for you. And if you have the other support systems around it, you may rather be based in a tier 2, tier 3 city. So that thought has grown into. So if someone wants to set up an operation in a tier 2, day one, you may not get the entire talent. But if you plan it over a period of time, let's say 0 to 18 months or 0 to 24 months, you get talent from three different sources that I mentioned. Number one is internally assigned talent to this place. Second one is get laterals who want to come back to their hometown. Third one is have talent that you can grow from campuses, hire people from campuses and train them.
Vinu, we were on a previous podcast last week with a different guest, and they were talking about work-life balance and how that's become an increasing driver across India as a whole. Is that another reason why tier 2 and tier 3 locations are becoming more popular?
Yes, I mean, across the world, tier 1 cities, there's a sort of fatigue that's built in. Take London, for example, Chris, where you're from. The commute time is roughly about 3 hours up and down, and maybe 15 minutes thrown in to walk to the tube station and back home. That's a lot of time. For 8 hours of work, you are almost putting in 40% of the time in commute. So there's practically no time left Monday to Friday. So we have become Monday to Friday. Most of us are occupied from 7:30 in the morning till 7:30 in the evening. But you go to a tier 2 city, you hardly drive for 15 minutes in India. And look at the time that you're saving. That's quality time each working day. And then you have the entire weekend for yourself. That's point number one. Point number two, the cost of living in tier two cities is much, much lower than in tier one cities. And number three, the luxury that tier two and tier three city provides in terms of enhancing your lifestyle. Chris, you can think of having a personalized tennis coach for yourself. You can think of a violin instructor coming home and teaching you violin 1 hour a day. You can think of a cook coming and teaching you South Indian cooking for 1 full month. And you would not even be paying a fraction of the cost that you would pay in a tier one city and getting personalized attention and services. These are small things that I'm talking about. Plus, there is a bounty of nature to be explored. Depending upon the faith that you have religious places to explore. And if someone wants to give back to the community, if they are from there, tier two and tier three cities love your time, your money, your effort. So there is a way of giving back to the society. On that note, I should also tell you that some companies have adopted tier three cities because they think that that's the way of giving back to the society. In India, it's called CSR, corporate social responsibility. 2% of your annual profits, if you're a certain size, has to be given to CSR activity. You can choose how you want to spend it. So, I mean, imagine if you are a multinational company headquartered in London and you're talking, or there are press articles about how the part of that 2% is spent in a tier three cities, modernizing a school, a place of worship, or providing playing facilities, bringing down crime, or contributing to educational skill development in a region. This is one of the reasons that attract companies to tier three cities. I would like to add one more example, Chris, there. I hope I'm not overstating the benefits of tier three cities. I have a client which is a manufacturing customer, which is about 40 kilometers from where our office is, just outside Chennai. Not a very thriving place. They have a village close by. They are doing very well. The company is doing very well. And I asked them what is their CSR responsibility. And he says that the village had a government school, village school, and they took responsibility of sprucing up the school, doing the building, painting it, building a toilet, nice little place for them to eat, doing their playground, etc. And the children are so happy, the parents are so happy. And the second thing they did is, India is a paddy country, south of India, they grow a lot of paddy. And paddy, when it's harvested, it has to be dried before it's processed. And they used to dry it on the road. So whenever there is traffic moving, you lose part of the paddy, or you have to move a little bit of the paddy to enable the traffic to move. So these people provided a platform where they can dry the paddy. I mean, you can imagine the impact that you have on that little village of 500 people, and you can imagine the impact of the ecosystem that you've created for the students. Even if you had given the money, I don't think it would have benefited so much. Their presence, their CSR, benefited them a lot.
That's brilliant. I mean, if I personally lived in India and needed to work in a GCC, I'd most definitely have to live in a tier 2 or a tier 3 city to hone my tennis skills, which I've lost since school. So that counts out, all the tier 1s for me if I was to move to India, Vinu. But it's really interesting how the corporate responsibility really plays a part in that, and I can. It's really helping me build a picture on, the real difference, I suppose, the differences in the way of life between the different cities as much as anything else. And do you expect the tier 2 and tier 3s to continue to grow at a similar rate to the tier 1s?
Oh, yes, I would expect it to grow, because it's just like how GCC started way back late 90s and early 2000. It was an experiment. Okay, and it pulled along so well. The momentum is so much that we hear about, as I mentioned in one of the podcasts, one new GCC a week in India. So even if 50% think of the migrating to tier 2 and tier 3 cities, you take the jobs where the people are, you build an ecosystem, and out of nowhere, you're building tier 1 cities which are competing with much larger tier 1 cities.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, it'd be great to see how it develops. If you're, if you're a leader, so you're a CTO, an HR leader, CIO, maybe even a CEO, someone who's involved in considering where to set up a GCC. Let's say India's the chosen country. First of all, of course, there are plenty of other options from a country perspective. But what strategic factors should be considered when deciding on the specific city within India that you might want to put a GCC? What should people be thinking about?
I mean, if you look at strategic from the point of view of investment, okay, it broadly encompasses 4 or 5 things. One of them is the feasibility of running a center, which city you want to run it. And then you do a market research around finalizing which city it has to be. So feasibility is one of the points. The second one is the legal and regulatory compliance. Are you complying? Because India is full of states. There are about 30 states. The legal and regulatory compliance varies from state to state, although not much of a variance, but still it varies. And then it ties back to wherever the headquarters is. And the third one is the infrastructure and technical support. I mentioned business continuity plans. Most of India is in seismic zones. So if you have operations in a tier 1 city, you are advised to have your infrastructure or BCP in another seismic zone so that if there is a disturbance in one place, it doesn't affect the other place. So infrastructure and technical setup is one thing that you have to keep in mind as a strategic factor. Talent. The number one reason why GCCs are coming to India is because talent and availability, and then you have to do workforce planning around it. The fifth one is about how do you operationalize the GCC. So these are 5 strategic factors. And if you are a very large multinational company, let's say an oil and gas major, you're a pharmaceutical major, your profits are high, your investment is high, you may want to give back to the society. And that's where operations in tier 2, tier 3 cities, or creating facilities in tier 2, 3 cities, even if you don't have centers running out of there, that could be one of the strategic factors behind setting up something in India. You give back to the society.
Very good. What about the cost elements overall? Because I know that talent is the number one reason. That's come up a few times actually on our podcast. Is very clear. But I know even from experience working with GCCs myself that the cost is still, a big consideration. Does it work out, generally speaking, more cost effective to go to a tier 2 or a tier 3 city when you take all the costs into account?
Oh yeah, salaries are definitely lower in tier 2 cities. Tier 3, all the more lower. The cost of infrastructure is a fraction in tier 3 cities over tier 1. It is a percentage, a 25 to 30% reduction in terms of infrastructure cost, tier 2 versus tier 1. Tier 3 is just a fraction. So employment costs and the infrastructure costs are the major costs. So that gets reduced. And in a big way.
Earlier on, you mentioned that many of the organisations start in a tier 1 city and then move out. Is there not an argument to start in, say, a tier 3 city and then move towards a Chennai or a Hyderabad or a Pune or somewhere like that?
You can do that based on the kind of GCC you are. Let's say you're a GCC which is into retail, then you require 20 different skills because retail is very IT intensive in terms of applications. If you're a bank, the kind of talent that you require, 80% of that necessarily comes from GCCs. But let's say you are an engineering center, the CAD, CAM, drawing, supporting an automotive company, very specialist and all. There is a good chance that you'll find all the skill that you're looking for in a tier 2 city. So it really depends on what's your core business. If it's pharmaceutical, if it's oil and gas, it's banking, it's better to start from tier 1 and then move to tier 2. That there are stories or incidents where people have started at tier 2, they remained in tier 2 or maybe considered tier 3, but they're very small. They can't be an example in itself. They cannot be a data point too.
Vinu, that's been really, really interesting. We're coming up towards the end of this podcast now. Would you mind just summarising, your final thoughts, like maybe the top 2 or 3 things that people need to think about if they were to, when choosing their city across India?
Yeah, summarizing, here is how it goes. Let's say you already have a GCC in India, in a tier 1 city. Choosing a tier 2 or a tier 3 city is that much more easier because you're already in, the knowledge factor is there, you know the cities, you have people who could be from those cities, leverage their knowledge. Try to get in an external consultant like Antel, because we have helped many companies move from a tier 1 to a tier 2 or a tier 3 cities. Because talent is one of the main reasons you would want to move there, apart from reducing the cost. So that's for people who are already established. People who are coming in new, my advice, having worked with several GCCs and done IT initiatives for so many years, I feel it's better to start from a tier 1 city and then quickly leverage that and move to a tier 2 or a tier 3 city. So that you don't have much of a difference between either of those facilities. So it should not be looked at as secondary facility. It should be looked at as equal, or a facility of equal importance. So there too, I will say your talent strategy plays a big role, apart from choosing which part of the city and how you brand yourself in the city to attract talent to your organization. Tier 3 cities is the flavor of the season. The government is giving a lot of SOPs. By SOPs meaning they incentivize people who move to a tier 3 city, because the government does not have to get people out of their comfort zone to try and work or populate the cities which are already populated. Take the work there rather. Skill people, because there are a lot of educated people in India. You can skill them, find them jobs, and then you can create technology parks in unheard of areas and have some of the best brains in Indian GCCs come and work in your city, and then provide them a flavor of your city and grow along with the GCC there. So tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 is all fine, but if you can plan your move in such a way that you adopt a tier 1 city and then move to tier 2, tier 3, you'll benefit a lot. There are case studies, there are stories, and I'll be happy to connect to any of the listeners who want to know more about what we would have done in those areas.
Thanks very much, Vinu. That's been very interesting as we start to drill into some of the finer details of GCCs. Just to wrap up on my side, we are continuing our series around global capability centres. There is a multitude of different content, both on podcasts with different guests and speakers, such as Vinu, who's now been on, I think, 3 of our podcasts, as well as many other guests looking at GCCs from an India perspective, but also looking, on a global basis. We looked at Africa the other week, and there's much more to come, looking at all the different components of GCC. So if you're somebody that's considering moving your organisation into a new country and leveraging a global capability centre, do reach out to myself or Vinu or any of our speakers to gather more insights around the topic. We here at the Leadership Collective are helping people on a day-to-day basis develop their own careers as well. That's another component of what we do. We also support people within our community when it comes to peer-to-peer conversation with other leaders like yourselves. We also deliver different kind of events, both virtual, in person, in lots of different topics. And we also have our global recruitment offering that enables organisations to expand on a global basis and help them recruit in different countries across different industries. So if any of those things are of interest, don't forget to sign up to the community at theleadershipcollective.global. I'll wrap it up there. Thanks very much again, Vinu, for being with us again today, and we'll see you on the next podcast.
Thank you very much, Chris, and I hope the content will be beneficial to people who invest their time in watching this end to end.